Chapter 5 of Golden Ditches, called Across the Shifting Sands. If you were to dig up but a small fraction of the relics that lie hidden in the restless sand along the present Suez Canal, you would solve riddles that have baffled historians for centuries. It is quite possible that your discoveries would move recorded history back another 1,000 years or more, for civilization in the valley of the Nile is so ancient and mysterious that its secret beginnings are known only to the river itself. In fact, practically every historian of note agrees that either here or along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers lies the true cradle of civilization. While our European ancestors still gnawed at bones and huddled before their flickering fires in dreary caves, the Egyptians were already planting crops, weaving cloth, and raising livestock. Since Egypt is a land of scant rainfall, irrigation got off to an early start. It is not surprising to learn that ditches soon crisscrossed the farmlands, carrying life-giving water to thirsty crops. These canals became objects of worship, and people quickly discovered further uses for them. They found that even the heaviest burdens could be floated with ease from place to place. Lacking adequate timber, the Egyptians made rafts and graceful boats by lashing together bundles of reeds called papyrus. Soon, wider and deeper canals served as roadways joining stone quarries and brick-making sites to the fast-growing cities of the Delta. It was not until sometime around the year 600 BC, however, that an attempt was made to dig a waterway across the 100-mile-wide isthmus separating the Red and Mediterranean seas. A prince named Necho or Nekos tackled the chore in a grand manner. He would probably have succeeded too had he not been discouraged by the dire prediction of a fortune teller. After some 120,000 workers had perished in his diggings, Nekos' soothsayer warned him that his ditch would become a tool of barbarians. Since such forecasts were not taken lightly in ancient Egypt, he abandoned the project. Nearly a century later, Darius the Persian took over where he left off and opened a broad trench from the Nile to the Red Sea. For over 1,000 years, many scholars doubted that Darius's canal ever really existed outside of his imagination, but rock-hard proof that at his bidding, ships sailed across the desert from Egypt to Persia came to light in 1866. During the construction of the present Suez Canal, workmen unearthed fragments of a stele, or stone marker, which praises his waterway in 4 languages: Persian, Median, Assyrian, and Egyptian. Had Nekos' soothsayer lived to witness the opening ceremony, he would have had good reason to say, "I told you so," for the barbarians, as all who could not speak Egyptian were called, not only made use of the canal, it was they who dug it. Probably no man-made waterway has witnessed so much strife, struggle, and bitter bloodshed as has the Suez. Savage battles between men and nations have surged almost continuously along its banks, but none has been as deadly or as never-ending as the war against the elements. Dry desert sand, driven by powerful winds, has choked its channels, and time after time has blotted them out entirely. Just when it seems that the desert has won the battle for all time, a new generation of diggers picks up the battered spade and scoops its way to glory or the grave. After Nekos and Darius, the Arabs and then the Caesars fought a losing duel with the blazing sands. Still later, Napoleon Bonaparte dreamed of making the Red Sea into a French lake. Kings and caliphs shoveled and sweltered before passing on into the pages of history. Some cleared old ditches or opened proud new ones in gay and colorful celebrations, while others fearfully filled them in again to prevent their use by a constant stream of invaders. A quick glance at a map of North Africa will show you why so many wanderers came to this place. The Sinai Peninsula, through which the Suez passes, has served as a vital crossroads of the world since the beginning of time. You might call it a busy interchange on the superhighway of history. So this picture is says, weighing in at 115,000 deadweight tons, the specially designed supertanker SS Manhattan crunches her way through the Northwest Passage, bringing the 500-year-old dream of Jacques Cartier, Hendrik Hudson, and a host of other bold seafarers to reality. And it's a picture of like an ice crushing boat. And this is a picture of it from like further away so that you can see it in the water with all the ice making its way through. The pictures don't seem to have a whole lot to do with what the words are about. All right, so the Sinai Peninsula, busy interchange on the superhighway of history. People from many places enter, leave, and cross over to continue their journey. No wonder that wise rulers in nearly every generation recognized the need for a dependable waterway to join these busy seas. On a short visit to Egypt in 1798, Napoleon conceived his French lake idea. Immediately, he ordered his chief engineer, Jacques Lepere, to survey the area and submit a report on the possibility of constructing a canal. Lepere's survey stated that the Red Sea towered more than 32 feet above the Mediterranean. This massive error in measurement, which was accepted as gospel for many years, added still another difficulty to the planning. At least 2 locks would be needed to control such a vast wall of water. Perhaps the error would have been discovered much sooner, but before Napoleon's plan took firm shape, he was driven from Egypt, never to return. More than 50 years later, another Frenchman saw at least part of the Little Corporal's dream come true. Little Corporal was another name for Napoleon. On a gala day in 1869, the final dike melted away, and the blue waters of the Mediterranean once again joined the bitter brine of the Red Sea. If you ask the average person, he will probably tell you without a moment's hesitation that Ferdinand de Lesseps built the present Suez Canal. Some biographers would have us believe that he accomplished that remarkable task almost single-handedly. Although he deserves a great deal of praise for his long and gritty struggle, many others also rate a share in that glory. In all fairness, an engineer called Père Enfantin should be called the real father of the Suez. It was he who surveyed the route, which was followed very closely by his young, one-time friend de Lesseps. Enfantin had the technical training and was instrumental in forming a company to undertake the project. He was to be placed in full control of the construction. But time and fate teamed up against him, while on the other hand, de Lesseps seemed to have been born under a lucky star. How else could this man, who was not even a trained engineer, guide such a tremendous undertaking to success? In just 10 years, from 1859 to 1869, his workers, many of them using their bare hands as tools, ripped a 101-mile-long trench across some of the most savage terrain on this planet. One account tells of how half-naked slaves rolled the sticky mud on their bare chests to form it into balls. Then they carried them up and over the steep embankment. As the work progressed, a few crews were issued a supply of newly arrived wheelbarrows. When one of the engineers dropped by to see how the new equipment was working out, he found the laborers carrying the barrows about on their backs. Such was the quality of his workers, but problems with them ranked as simple incidents when stacked against the endless sand and broiling heat. Thousands upon thousands of laborers dropped from the ranks in the 120-degree temperatures and were buried where they fell. They were joined in their blast furnace graves by entire crews struck down in a raging cholera epidemic which swept the site in 1865. De Lesseps' grandson, also bearing the name Ferdinand, was counted among the victims, and for a time the grandfather's unshakable composure deserted him completely. But in the end, his big dream overcame the grief, and he plunged again into the task. From the very beginning, England worked feverishly to either prevent the construction altogether or to delay it indefinitely. Her statesmen feared a successful waterway dredged by the French would boost their influence far too high in this vital area. But the canny Lesseps always managed to keep just one jump ahead of Britain's best agitators. When they complained of his use of slave labor, he reminded them that in Egypt, slavery had for centuries been accepted as a normal way of life. Save your silly slogans for the United States and Russia, he told them, and many thinking men agreed with his reasoning. De Lesseps, as we have said, was not a trained engineer, but he was a superb showman and an expert at swaying people to his way of thinking. To help matters along, he had relatives of the highest order back home. His lucky star placed his cousin, Empress Eugenie, on the French throne just when he needed all the supporters he could possibly dig up. As in any project lasting as long as 10 years, many unforeseen problems were bound to arise with the digging of the Suez Canal. De Lesseps faced his share of them. The 6 years he had been allotted by the original concession ran into 8, 9, and finally 10. Furthermore, the early cost estimate of 200 million francs proved to be less than half the required amount. Besides problems of money and time, he had to deal with those of fickle people. To placate Egypt's emperor, Said Pasha, de Lesseps named the new seaport on the Mediterranean Port Said, and named it in his honor. But that gesture had little effect on the ailing old man. Long before the project was completed, the English talked him into withdrawing most of the Egyptian workers. De Lesseps countered that move by bringing in the most modern equipment available in the world. Giant steam dredges spouted spumes of steam and belched clouds of black smoke in the superheated desert air. Untiringly, they labored around the clock. Each mechanical monster scooped up more earth than a whole battalion of sweltering slaves. Like so many other obstacles faced down by the dogged Frenchmen, withdrawal of the laborers proved in the end to be an advantage instead of a tragedy. When the old Pasha died rather suddenly, his son Ismail took over the reins. Soon afterward, the new ruler, who was on friendly terms with the British, ordered all work on the canal to cease. You would think that de Lesseps would have been heartbroken by this new turn of events, but again his uncanny luck held. It was decided that the question of whether to continue or not should be submitted to a referee of sorts. You can readily guess the outcome when you learn that Napoleon III, the husband of de Lesseps' royal cousin, was chosen as the mediator. How big a part Princess Eugenie played in the resulting conference can only be imagined. In any case, the digging continued with renewed vigor. Then, late in the summer of 1869, in spite of petty jealousies, royal interference, blazing heat, rampant epidemics, and a casualty list of fantastic proportions, the mighty Suez at last became a reality. Thus, nearly 2,400 years after Darius commanded his ships to sail across the isthmus from Egypt to Persia, modern vessels were able to do likewise. But the battle for control of this important link still rages on into the 20th century. On June 6, 1967, during the fast-paced Israel-Arab War, the canal was closed to all shipping. At this writing, some 3 years later, it is still closed with 14 ships trapped in its channels. So we should look up when it opened, because I'm pretty sure it's open now. And this book was written in so if you said 3 years, 1970. So it would have been closed, it was closed for at least 3 years, possibly more, with ships trapped inside it. For every day the canal remains closed in Egypt, Egypt suffers a tremendous loss of revenue. To point out just what this vast loss amounts to in dollars and cents, the daily tolls in 1966 would more than pay for 5,000 medium-priced American automobiles. With each passing day, the unused channels are steadily losing the age-old battle with the ever-shifting sands. To make matters even worse, nearly every day a shooting skirmish takes place along the strife-torn waters. But this time a new and much more ominous threat hangs over the storied Suez. Huge fleets of supertankers, too large to pass through the canal, are rolling down the ways of Japanese and Scandinavian shipyards. These speedy giants steam swiftly around the Cape of Good Hope in ever-increasing numbers. When a top executive of one of these fleets was asked if he were eager to see the Suez reopened, his laconic answer may well have sealed the fate of one of the oldest man-made waterways in the world. The Suez, he said with an expressive shrug, who needs it anyhow?